Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about broken decks. Yep, that's right. We got a new series thing. Probably won't be too long just because we're going to be talking about broken decks. And I mean really, really broken stuff. Not like Ramen Op Red is like slightly too good for, standard. We're talking about like the most silly of silly, like design mistake piled on top of design mistake, all being run in the same deck. So yeah, we're going to be talking about crazy stuff. So for our first installment, we're going to be talking about Gro-A-Tog, the vintage version of this deck, which was completely obscene, completely silly. So relax, sit back. I got some coffee, early in the morning for me. You guys will get a nice drink of whatever kind you like. So that's good. Maybe some water, maybe some whiskey, whatever. I don't judge, either or. So, all right. So we're going to be talking about Gro-A-Tog. And basically, we're looking like at the upper echelon of broken stuff. About the lowest kind of power deck we'll be talking about in this series, probably something like, probably like Cobblade. So that should give you a good estimate of what we're really talking about. Cobblade at the time, at least in standard, very, very powerful. Although today, you'd be like, well, this is just like an average, or maybe slightly below average, maybe in some respects, modern deck, So we're looking at stuff that's like, you're not going to see this stuff again. You'll never, like, these are lessons that we've mostly learned. I mean, sure, these are these are the original lessons where it taught Wizards of the Coast that free mana is bad, although they keep making that same mistake. But the original ones were a little bit more silly than stuff like Wilderness Reclamation or Fires of Invention. We're talking about Tolarian Academy and Dark Ritual and so on. So yeah, this is like the best of the best or the worst of the worst, I guess, depending on which side of the table you're on. But like I said, we're gonna be talking about Gro-A-Tog. So let's get into it. All right. So this deck is basically about as insane as you can really get for like a fair deck, quote unquote fair. Uh, I mean, even still, it definitely um, walks a pretty fine line. Because I mean, yeah, sure, you know you're attacking with creatures and stuff, but I mean, everything else that surrounds it is certainly not quote unquote fair. But this is a really, really powerful deck. Definitely the upper echelon of what you could ever imagine of a deck that doesn't want to explicitly combo out or rely upon really um, broken synergies or whatnot, although obviously there is that here. Deck's ability to easily shift between aggro control and combo, really making it the first sort of aggro combo control deck, which is, I mean, obviously like a little scary, being able to easily switch between these roles, no problem. Either beating down with Dryads, just controlling the game, countering spells, drawing cards, or literally comboing out with Berserk. This deck can do either one of those things from turn to turn and switch back and forth, which is easily one of the reasons why it was so difficult to deal with, but also in context at the time, um, a lot of vintage or Type 1, as it was called at the time, was filled with a lot of decks like Sly, things like Keeper. So these were not quote unquote bad decks, but they were so completely outclassed by Gro-A-Tog that it was kind of silly, a little bit silly. Um, yeah, I mean, or even stuff like the mono blue decks, even if they had, four factor fictions at the time, it was just recently restricted. It was none of those decks would even stand close to a chance against Gro-A-Tog, which its restriction of Gush happened very, very quickly after the deck was sort of really refined. Took about, I don't know, 4 or 5 months or so, even, and especially for a format that really didn't get much attention. I mean, even at the time, it was getting more popular, but this is a pretty fast restriction, so it certainly demonstrated its power. And typically, what oftentimes you can do against a lot of these aggro control style decks, which Gro-A-Tog typically sort of adopted its native role as, just play stuff, counter spells if you try and kill my dude, you know, kind of protect the queen kind of thing. You can just outcard them. You can just like remove all their stuff, kill a Tog and a Dryad or whatever with a, you know, a Wrath or something, and then uh, just draw more cards with them or whatever. Again, that didn't actually work because A, they were playing Gush and a bunch of other like silly draw spells and tutor spells and stuff, so they're able to always assemble the Gush Bond engine pretty easily. So you couldn't really try and outcard them, and it definitely put a lot of pressure on a lot of these control decks to try and deal with it, and of course they really couldn't. So not only was it faster than those decks, but it also was better at playing the control role due to the nature of something like Gush combined with even something that you wouldn't expect a aggro control deck to play, like Library of Alexandria. But we'll get to that in a sec. And this deck was really the best, probably one of the best decks at the time to really abuse Yawgmoth's Will, which was a current trend we'll see in the next few years of just decks that really just broke Yawgmoth's Will very, very hard. Enough to the point where people even wanted to ban Yawgmoth's Will. That was a big talking point. And it uses the whole animal efficiently. So basically you're able to turn, you know, life into land drops, and then the land drops turn into actual cards in your hand, and then of course it lets you play more cards, so that again spells in graveyard, and you play more spells and it pumps your dryads, and the more cards in graveyard of course pump Tog, and so on and so forth. So every element of the deck really synergized well with every other element. It was definitely pretty impressive. So let's go over the history of it, but let's first bring up the deck list. All right. So Gro was an old extended deck created in about 2001, 2002. So like right around when Plane Shift came out, because of Queer on Dryad was really the biggest printing. Really gave you a big payoff for chaining cantrips, right? And the Gro style decks made by Alan Comer, I believe. This was really the next evolution of the Turbo Xerox style decks. And of course, used Gush as well. Again, another sort of, I don't want to say unused, but it's certainly underappreciated for how good it was. And so this style of deck, and extended at the time, was a very good foil to the Illusions Donate decks. That was mostly what it was for, but it was also good against a lot of other decks, just fairly high power level. Did a lot of good stuff, very novel gameplay, at least at the time. You know, now we see this sort of reflected, of course, in the Delver style decks in Legacy, and then some other formats like maybe Death Shadow and Modern and stuff. So it was a big thing, and then eventually Patrick Chapin took the deck in 2002. I think it was Vintage Champs, Vintage Worlds, or whatever. He won the tournament with a Gro deck, just straight blue-green, with like 4 Dryads and 4 Ophidian. Yes, Ophidian. And that was pretty interesting. So, but a lot of people poo-pooed it. I remember on the forums at the time, like on the Mana Drain, people were very skeptical of it. Like, how could this actually beat like our wonderful keeper decks and all these other things? Which obviously it did. Pretty handily. It beat basically everything. It didn't really have, especially before Mirrodin, where we see the workshop decks get a huge shot in the arm. This was like early 2003, before Mirrodin came out. It was basically run at the tables. There was no real way any other deck could compete. So it was pretty crazy. So eventually, Roland Bode was the one that really decided to add black to the Gro-A-Tog list, take out the bad Ophidians, add Psychotogs, and really sort of, this is the list we see here by Stephen Menendian. He's the one that really brought it to its sort of final form, at least in 2003. But yeah, and it's just tons of tutors and card draw and everything else. So this is really the first deck that really broke Merchant Scroll. Merchant Scroll for Gush half the time, or I guess, you know, sometimes you get Ancestral, but a lot of times you're getting Gush over Ancestral, especially if you have a fast bond in play, because you're producing mana and drawing cards, and every Gush is like plus 6.5 to like your Tog. So tons and tons of cards, really really good. Um, so yeah, what we see here is basically we just got Drads and Togs for your win condition. Then you have your all your card draw and tutors. So tutors and Merchant Scroll, of course, demonic, vampiric, mystical, etc. Cunning Wish, of course, it's very good because that can get berserk. Although they Steven in this list played berserk main deck. And then we have random busted cards like Time Walk. Time Walk's obviously very good with Queer and Dryad and such. And then your counter magic, force, misdirection. A lot of the times they'll play like duress main deck sometimes, but not always. But in a lot of later versions they played it just because it's just so much better than something like Counterspell. Counterspell itself was okay at the time. Misdirection obviously very good because you had like infinite amount of cards. Misdirection was good against plows and bolts and stuff like that would target your stuff, and it's still good in counter wars. I mean, even just looking at this deck now, there isn't much you'd really want to change. I mean, sure you'd switch out Sleight of Hand for Ponders or something, maybe reduce the amount of Togs, increase the number of fetch lands, but there's not a real ton of like difference um, that you would change this list today, 20, well, almost 20, but about 17 or so years later. So this kind of strategy is very timeless, and is very, very powerful. Obviously, misdirection is really the big one, just because it, did double duty as protecting your threats from, removal. There's also doing a good force of will impersonation in counter wars, of course, which was a big thing. And then that obviously was one of the reasons they played Duress main deck, because Duress was very good against something like Misdirection, or just clearing out their forces and things like that. And the sideboard again really just shows like how much crazy stuff was really happening that all came together in like a year or two to really make this deck insane. Like we have, for example, an Onslaught. Not only do we have the fetch lands, which make playing a bunch of brainstorms very, very good, allowing you to freely shuffle away bad cards, but also Naturalize, which is insane because these blue-black decks don't really have, or blue-black-green, I should say, very good answers to like resolved artifacts and enchantments. Well, Colored Pike shifts a little bit. Onslaught, we have Naturalize, and this is a very clean, good answer to all sorts of nasty stuff. So that's incredible. And a bunch of different hate and things like that. So we have Naturalize, which is a big gain. All the fetch lands, Tog, which came out just like a year before Onslaught. And so all of it's very much like this crazy like confluence of events that sort of like made this deck go nuclear, right? It is pretty crazy, pretty crazy. Yeah, so this deck was certainly chided. Everyone said Chapin, not sure how you say it, was dumb and he was wrong and blah blah blah. Well, after a couple playtesting sessions with the deck, and especially when they had it black, I mean it's not even close. It was just crushing everything, and this is the same sort of thing that happened with Psychotog in other formats around this time. Was just people just sort of play tested it. I know some of my friends said that they didn't have Shadow Mage Infiltrator at the time, so they just subbed in Psychotogs. It was the same cost, using it as a proxy, but enough times where they're like, wow, this card would actually be insane here, to where they figured out like, oh, we should just use Psychotog. So there's lots of crazy stuff happening. Printing of Dryad, abuse of Gush, dual lands, fetch lands, mana base, unlocking Brainstorm, fusing Merchant Scroll, printing of Naturalize, the use of Berserk to really cut down the amount of time to kill. It's just crazy. It's just crazy. So, whew, talking so much. Let's go on. All right, so let's talk about the main draw to this engine, the Gush Bond engine. And this is very, very powerful. This will let you just draw tons of cards, produce tons of mana, and basically combo out. This engine was actually good and used in Storm decks too later on, when Gush was unrestricted in about like 2006 or 7 or so. but then it was also restricted like maybe a year later with a bunch of other stuff. So, but anyways, again, returning the two islands to your hand, paying the alternate cost of Gush, tapping them for mana, drawing two cards, and then with Fast Bond in play, you'll be able to replay those lands, losing a little bit of life, of course, in the process, and then chaining them together with Yawgmoth's Will, and you can just go off, produce tons of mana, draw tons of cards, um, and this, of course, if you have a Dryad or two in play, this pumps every Dryad for every spell you're playing. Um, Yawgmoth's Will combos very good with stuff like Black Lotus just in general, so it can be free. Um, and yeah, you're just going totally nuts, totally crazy. This is probably one of the best. I mean, Gush is, I think, now seen as one of the best card drawing spells of all time. Very close to Ancestral. And when you pair it with like Fast Bond and Yawgmoth's Will, it's even better in a lot of situations, which is, I mean, uh, pretty high praise without even being hyperbolic, you know, because Ancestral's like, I mean, it's hard to get, better than Ancestral. Well, what if instead of costing mana, it produced a couple mana instead? So yeah, I mean, just totally nuts. And the drawback for Fast Bond, oh, you lose some life. Your deck is so much faster than everything. You just like crush everything else. And just being able to like play a Tog and then do all this crap and then just time walk and then maybe flashback the time walk with the Yawgmoth's Will. I mean, take a couple extra turns and just, I mean, just huge combo S turns that these aggressive decks just couldn't deal with. They couldn't deal with. And of course, the four main deck misdirections was horrific against stuff like Sly and Suicide Black because their hymns and sinkholes and things like that, bolts, fire blast, all that stuff just wouldn't hit. It was pretty bad for them. So this engine was perfect and insane, and uh, was really the big reason for the deck's success, having this super combo element. And Gush itself was actually very good when you're just doing like regular like draw go, playing the hard control role, because Gush gets you back up to 4+ cards. So even if you only have 3 cards, you get up to 7, and with the library in play, you can start drawing more cards. So you aren't punished for even playing out very aggressively, which is one of the drawbacks of library. But now here, even then, that doesn't matter. And then obviously, library and taking up a land drop doesn't really matter with Fast Bond. So I mean, everything is just like, how is this even real? Like, how? I mean, this deck is easily outdraw like stuff like Keeper, the um, 5-color control deck at the time, which is very dirtily like Weissman-esque school. But I mean, compared to stuff like Gro-A-Tog, I mean, the deck looked like a dinosaur, really. Very, well, not good. So, but yeah, breaking Yawgmoth's Will was one of the, well, Yawgmoth's Will, and then also Gush, and then also Merchant Scroll was really Gro-A-Tog's biggest claim to fame. Okay, and you don't have to play a gajillion spells. You don't have to play like 20 spells to get lethal and stuff, just due to Berserk, which you could play one main deck in Tutor for, or play one in the sideboard to Cunning Wish for. Yeah, so Berserk was very good, instrumental on a bunch of kills, obviously very good with Tog, only needing to play like a couple gushes and then wish for Berserk or tutor up Berserk or whatever and just trample over him. It's just insane. And of course that, Tog only gets the bonus for 1 turn, so Berserk really synergize extremely well. Again, Time Walk with a Dryad or two in play is pretty ridiculous against pretty much any deck. Lets you do all sorts of crazy stuff. Very powerful here. Really, because you need creatures or to really take full advantage of Time Walk to really get the full value out of the card. Because just basically untapping some lands and drawing a card is fine, it's good, but having all the extra creatures and of course it pumping Dryad too, I mean, really great, really powerful. Again, Tog is, what more can you say? This is pretty much the last time when we really had a creature sort of like really shape the way not only how formats played, but really how even games themselves played out. I mean, we have this kind of now a little bit with something like Uro, but Uro didn't, you know, the older you go back in formats, he gets progressively less powerful. Like, yeah, Uro's pretty good in Legacy. He's definitely one of the premier threats, but you can ignore him and just like, you know, turn one Gristlebrand or something. Like, it's good, but it's not really the way that Psychotog affected, where Tog was like really, really good in standard and then just got progressively better as the card pool got larger and you were able to splash other colors to fix problems, you know, like I said, with Naturalize and so on, and then you get these busted cards from Alpha. Um, Really, really went totally insane. Um, this used to be a big thing, you know, back in the day, talking about what's the best creature ever, what's the best creature ever. It didn't take very long, maybe about a year, 6 months or so after Tog was printed, to everyone being like, okay, yeah, it's obviously this guy, right? And you still had a little bit of that around, like when Tarmogoyf came out, but yeah, Tog is completely absurd. Not as good today because it's not a lot of formats where it can really shine in, but that's okay. And of course, last but certainly not least, Quirion Dryad, a very powerful, very fun card. Um, I mean, yeah, well, there's not much to say. It's pretty obvious. Play white, blue, black, or red spells, and it pumps it. So, yep. Eventually, the Gro-A-Tog decks did end up splashing red for like Fire Ice or Rack and Ruin and stuff, so they could answer like some of the workshop decks, because those were still a problem. You know, the decks spamming Juggernauts and Suchis and stuff. Um, so yeah, it even got use out of the playing red spells part. That's kind of nice. But yep. So that's pretty much it. I mean, the deck was basically like an aggro control deck that could really lean into the control part, really lean into the combo part, and even play like an aggro game. And it was able to outdraw everything. It had answers for literally everything, um, and it can do well everything. And there wasn't really any competitor to it, at least until something like Burning Long came out. But that deck didn't last very long either. We'll talk about that one a little bit later. It was really only until Mirrodin before we really get the other half of like the shop's spheres versus the Xerox cantrip sort of dichotomy that we have today. And this, yeah, actually, it's kind of funny how these two different polar opposites, the the artifact-based decks versus like these super powerful multicolor blue tempo aggro control style decks, still with us today. So Gro-A-Tog was really the beginning of that, and it's definitely a very powerful deck, a very silly deck. Um, Gush Bond is insane, answers for everything, extremely fast clock, can kill you out of nowhere just due to Berserk. Doesn't matter how many blockers you have, you could even like play a bunch of stuff, Berserk a guy, Yawgmoth's Will, and then Berserk it again. Pretty crazy stuff. So yeah, but that's it for today, guys. I think we covered quite a bit of it. There's a lot to go through, but hopefully we got through most of it. So thanks for stopping by and have a great day.